Jack was a young married man, but Jack was lazy. Jack's favourite occupation was doing nothing. Best of all, he'd like to get his armchair, put it in front of the fire, and sit and watch the flames. And Jack would quite happily sit there for hours, just watching the flames in the fire, watching the smoke, and imagining pictures in the fire. You could see amazing things there in the fire. There were landscapes, there were battles, there were mountains, there was sea, there were clouds. And he'd sit there, as I say, for hours, just watching it, letting his imagination run riot. And as he was doing so, he'd pick his nose and flick it in the fire, and pick his nose and flick it in the fire. Well, on the day that this story took place, he hadn't been there for hours. He'd been there for perhaps 10 minutes when his wife suddenly came bustling in from the kitchen. "Here, Jack," she said, "on your feet, come on. I've just been to the cupboard to get us some food for dinner. There's no food in the cupboard. In fact, there's no food in the whole house. So get yourself up, get your coat on, take your gun, go out, and don't come back until you've got us something we can eat. I don't care whether it's fish, fowl, or fur." Jack grumbled. He didn't like going out hunting. For a start, he wasn't very good at it. And also, it was cold. It had been snowing. Everywhere was covered with snow and ice. And Jack didn't want to go out on a day like that. But his wife said he had to, so off he went. Put on his coat, got his rusty old gun from the corner. Out he went. Well, Jack was quite lucky. He'd only wandered across the first couple of fields when he came down to the side of the lake. And the lake was frozen. And just sat on the ice, just on the edge of the lake, were two lovely big fat ducks. And Jack thought, great, if I can just get one of those ducks, then that'll do us dinner today. We'll be able to make soup out of it tomorrow. I won't need to be able to come out and hunt anymore for days. There's one snag. This wasn't the fact that Jack wasn't a very good shot, wasn't very good at hunting, but it was Jack's rifle. It wasn't a modern repeating one. You know, you couldn't go bang, 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 and keep on shooting until you eventually hit something. You could fire one shot at a time. And before you could fire that one shot, you had to load your gun, which was a long, complicated rigmarole. You started off, you got your powder flask, you poured gunpowder down the barrel, took a ramrod, rammed it down. Then you got a little piece of wadding, a little bit of cloth, and you put that in the barrel. With your ramrod, you rammed it down. Then you got round to your musket ball and you put that in, and you got your ramrod and you rammed it down. And it took everyone quite a long time, but it took Jack 4 or 5 times longer because he didn't do it very often and had to stop and think, what order you do things in. And so there he was, loading his gun, and he got the gunpowder in, and he was just putting the wadding in and ramming that down when he looked up and he saw the ducks. The ducks had beginning to waddle off, and he thought, no, they're going to fly away. They'll escape before I've even had a chance to shoot. So as quick as he possibly could, he finished ramming the wadding, got the musket ball, put it in, rammed it down, up with his gun, bam, fired. And the gun went off with the most tremendous crash. He couldn't remember it ever making such a loud noise before. And not only the noise, but the recoil from it, the kick. It knocked him over, flat on his back. Flat on the cold, hard, icy ground. Except that it wasn't. It was sort of soft and warm. And when he looked round, he saw why. It was a rabbit. Poor old rabbit had been hiding behind a bush. And when the gun went bang, he shot out from behind the bush, ran behind Jack. Jack fell over, flat. Squashed rabbit. Well, Jack thought, that's all right. I was shooting at those ducks, but I've got a rabbit. That's even better. I'm sure a rabbit will last longer than a duck. Got more food on it. But when Jack actually stopped to look, it was even better than that. Because what had actually happened, he'd been in such a hurry to fire at these ducks, he'd forgotten to take the ramrod out. He fired his gun with this great metal rod still stuck down the barrel, which is why it had made such a noise and such a kick. And the ramrod had gone shooting out towards the ducks, got straight through the first duck, got the second one as well, carried on flying across the lake like an airborne kebab, came down in the middle of the lake, speared a fish that was swimming around just under the water. Great. One shot, I've got a rabbit, 2 ducks and a fish, thought Jack. I don't suppose he knew the fish was there at that time. But the ramrod with the ducks and the fish were out in the middle of the lake, so he had to go and get that. Put down his gun, took off his coat, very, very carefully crept out across the ice. Just as he got to the middle, he bent down to pick up the ramrod, and the ice gave way. Collapsed. Jack went down in the freezing cold, icy water. Came up there, stood just for a second or two while he got his breath back in this water. But in that second or two, two pieces of ice with razor sharp edges drifted together and cut Jack's head off. But that wasn't the end of Jack. Jack thought about it very quickly, picked up his head, stuck it back on, and because it was so cold, it froze, and he was all right. So he climbed out of the water, took the ramrod, took the ducks, took the fish, and carefully walked back to land. He didn't want to fall in the water again. When he got back there, he put on his coat, picked up the gun, picked up the rabbit, went home. When he got home, knocked on the door. His wife answered the door and he said, "Look, you told me not to come back without fish, fowl or fur. Well, look, I've got the whole set. Here's a fish, here's 2 ducks, and here's a rabbit as well." And she gave him a great big hug. "Oh, Jack, what a magnificent hunter you are. What a marvellous husband you are. Come in, get yourself warm. I'll cook us some of this food up for a meal." And so Jack went and got himself dry, got himself warm, put on some new clothes, went back downstairs to his trusty armchair, stoked up the fire, sat down there in his armchair and watched the flames and started to think about what a great hunter he was and how he could tell all his mates about this down at the pub tonight, and how many animals was it he got with one shot, and could he exaggerate it, make it even more. This was going to be a really good story. And while he sat there thinking about this, he picked his nose, flicked it in the fire. It was all right first time. Again, he picked his nose and flicked it in the fire. Well, it felt a bit damp round his neck, but it was all right. The third time, picked his nose and flicked it in the fire. This time, his head came with it, and whoosh, that was the end of Jack. So, if you do pick your nose, be very careful that your head doesn't come off with it.